She turned around, and they were gone. Temperance Birch stood on the platform at Larkspur Station, with her hands still warm from holding a stranger's wrist. A woman who had fainted near the water barrel, whose color came back slowly, who kept saying she was fine, and where the prairie schooner and the 3-wagon party bound for Pinecroft had been parked along the station road, there was now nothing but wheel ruts in the August dust. She picked up her second trunk from where she'd set it and walked to the edge of the platform and looked north. The wagons were still visible, a quarter-mile out, moving at the unhurried pace of people who had a schedule and considered it met. She'd been told to be back in 10 minutes. She'd been gone 12. Temperance set the trunk down again. She looked at it, and at the other one, the brown leather one that had belonged to her mother, and she looked at the station behind her, staffed by a single man asleep in a chair with his hat over his face, and she looked at the August sky over the Alberta Territory, which was enormous and pale, and entirely indifferent to her situation. She did not call after the wagons. She had a clear view of the second wagon in the party, and she had seen Mr. Dunlop turn in his seat, look back at the platform, and make the deliberate choice to keep moving. Calling after him would have been asking for something she already knew he'd decided not to give. She sat down on the brown trunk and thought about what she had. This was something her mother had taught her quietly in the years before the illness took her. When the ground goes out from under you, Eleanor Birch used to say, "Don't look at what's gone. Look at what's left. Make the list." Temperance made the list. 2 trunks, both intact, $14.20. She'd counted it on the train from Toronto that morning. A letter of appointment from the Pinecroft School Committee, signed by a Mr. Adalbert Finn, confirming her position as the settlement's first full-time schoolteacher. A wool coat, folded on top of the smaller trunk, too heavy for August, but essential by October, and she knew it. A tin of tea, a packet of hard biscuits, a small ledger she brought everywhere, the habit of a woman who had spent 4 years keeping accounts at her father's trading company, and trusted numbers the way other people trusted prayer. What she did not have, a horse, a wagon, any way to cover the 14 miles to Pinecroft before dark. She added water to the top of the list. It was already 2:30. The station master woke when she knocked on the frame of his door. He was a man named Crew, who had a face built for delivering bad news, and delivered this particular version in the tone of someone who'd done it before. "There's no afternoon stage to Pinecroft," he said. "There's a supply wagon goes out Thursday mornings. This is Tuesday. Is there anyone traveling north today?" Crew considered this with his hat pushed back. "Fella named Mackay picked up his horses about an hour ago from the livery. Runs a spread up near Pinecroft. Might still be at the feed store." She thanked him and picked up her smaller trunk and walked to the feed store. Fraser Mackay was loading sacks of oats into a flatbed wagon when she found him. He was somewhere in his middle 30s, tall and spare in the way of men who worked outside every day without thinking of it as exercise, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, and hands checking the load distribution without looking at them because he'd done it 10,000 times. She noticed he had tied off both horses before he'd started loading. She didn't know yet why she noticed that. "Excuse me, Mr. Mackay." He turned. He had the kind of eyes that assessed a situation without broadcasting the assessment, gray, steady, and presently directed at her smaller trunk. "That's me," he said. "My name is Temperance Birch. I'm the new schoolteacher for Pinecroft. I was traveling with the Dunlop party and I was left at the station." She said this plainly, because plain was accurate, and she had no interest in softening facts that were nobody's fault but Dunlop's. "Mr. Crew says you're going north. I'd like to ask if you have room." Fraser Mackay looked at her for a moment, then at the wagon, then at the road north. "You've got luggage," he said. "2 trunks. I left one at the station." He nodded once, the kind of nod that means a decision has been made and doesn't require ceremony. "I'll bring the wagon around. You can get your trunk." She did. He didn't offer to come with her, which she found she preferred. When she returned, he'd pulled the wagon to the platform and was already adjusting the tailgate. She lifted her end of the brown trunk without waiting for him to offer. She could tell by the slight pause in his movement that this surprised him mildly. He said nothing about it. They were out of Larkspur by 3 o'clock. The prairie spread in every direction with the particular flatness Temperance had read about and not quite believed until now. Grassland and sky, in proportions that made the wagon feel very small. The horizon so far out it seemed to belong to a different country. She had grown up in Toronto, where the view ended at the next building, and the openness here had a physical quality, like pressure released. For the first mile, neither of them said anything, she observed, the way she always did when she was uncertain, systematically. The wagon was well maintained. There was a rifle in a bracket under the seat, clean and oiled. No personal items in the bed aside from the oat sacks. He hadn't been expecting a passenger. "I appreciate this," she said. "Road safe enough," he said. "No reason not to." "Not your welcome, not any time." The plain logic of a decent choice. She could work with that. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. 8 years. Started it the year the railway came through. "Do you keep records of the sales?" The question seemed to catch him slightly. "Some. More or less than you should." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Less, probably. She turned forward again and filed that away. They were perhaps 6 miles out when the near horse, a bay gelding named, she gathered from the way Fraser addressed him, Fen, went uneven. Fraser felt it before she saw it, his hands tightening on the reins. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down with the focused economy of someone for whom this was neither a crisis nor a surprise. Just a thing that required attention. "Lost a shoe," he said. "Can't push him on this road without it." Temperance looked at the sky, the way she'd been learning to look at Alberta sky, which told you things if you paid attention. 3 hours of light, maybe. "We stop here," Fraser said. "I've got camp supplies. You can have the wagon bed. I'll take the ground. First light, I fix the shoe. We're in Pinecroft by mid-morning." She considered this. One night on an open road with a man she'd met 4 hours ago who had been in those 4 hours completely without pretense or performance. The rifle was clean. His horses were tied before anything else. He had not made any part of the ride feel like he expected something for it. "All right," she said. "Thank you." She helped him make camp. She had identified the tasks available and could manage them without instruction, and she preferred that to standing at the edge of things waiting to be useful. She built the fire. He tended Fenn's hoof by the remaining light and pronounced it clean. Shoe came off without damage, which was, he said, the good news. They ate. Dried pork and beans, the kind of meal that exists purely to sustain. She ate without comment because she'd had nothing since a biscuit on the train and the food was food. Above them, the Alberta sky went extraordinary with stars. She had been told about this and had not believed it either. "What takes you to Pinecroft?" Fraser asked after a while. "A teaching position," she said. "I wrote to Mr. Finn in March. He wrote back in April. I gave notice in Toronto in June." "Long way to come." "I needed somewhere far enough," she said. He was quiet in the way she'd been learning to identify as his particular kind of attention. Not absence, but waiting. She had met almost no one in her life who understood that waiting was itself a form of listening. "I kept the books at my father's trading company for 4 years," she said. "Managed the accounts. He had a business partner, Geoffrey Ashwell, who had money in the company and opinions about how my father's debts ought to be settled. His wife had died the year before. He decided I was the practical answer." She looked at the fire. "My father agreed without telling me." Fraser said nothing. "I found out the way you find out your furniture has been sold, as a fact that had already been decided. I was 23, Ashwell was 51, and my father seemed to believe the appropriate response from me was gratitude." "What did you do?" Fraser said. "I took the ledger records I had personally maintained for 4 years," she said, "which I considered wages I was owed and had never been paid, and I left." He looked at the fire. "That took something," he said. "It took calculation," she said, "which I'm reasonably good at." Something moved in his expression. She had the sense that he was revising an impression upward. Fenn exhaled in the darkness at the edge of the firelight, a long, slow breath, the kind that seems to comment on things. She slept in the wagon bed and woke to Fraser already at work on the shoe in the gray light before sunrise. She rebuilt the fire and made tea from her tin and thought about what she knew and didn't know. What she knew, 14 miles to Pinecroft, a letter of appointment from Mr. Adelbert Finn, a teaching position she had come 2,000 miles for. What she didn't know, what she'd find when she got there. She was about to find out. Pinecroft was not what she'd imagined, which she acknowledged was her own fault for imagining. It was a settlement rather than a town, a general store, a small detachment building for the Northwest Mounted Police, a church that had been built before most of the houses and looked it, a post office the size of a pantry, a livery, a handful of houses spread back from the main track. The schoolhouse, she looked for it immediately, was not on the main road. "Where is the school?" she asked Fraser. He didn't answer right away. She looked at him. "There was a fire," he said. "About 3 weeks ago, chimney fault, building's gone." She looked at the empty lot he indicated. The foundation stones remained and some charred lumber. The smell of it was still faint on the air. "You knew," she said. "I'd heard," he said. "I wasn't certain." A pause. "I should have told you what I'd heard. On the road." She looked at him. He met it without looking away. "Yes," she said. "You should have." She held it for a moment, and then, because the admission was genuine and ungarnished, "I understand why you didn't. But next time, tell me." He nodded once. That was all, and it was enough. A woman came out of the general store and stopped on the step and looked at the wagon with the frank, unguarded attention of someone who had decided long ago that pretending not to notice things was inefficient. She was perhaps 55, broad-shouldered, with gray cutting through dark hair, and the bearing of a woman whose opinions carried weight and knew it. "Phrase," she said by way of acknowledgement. Then to Temperance, "You the school teacher?" "I am," Temperance said. "Temperance Birch." "Irene Quill," the woman said. "My husband runs the general store. Come inside, I'll put coffee on. You look like you slept in a wagon." "I did," Temperance said, and climbed down. Irene Quill's coffee was excellent, which helped considerably. "The school committee's been in a state since the fire," Irene said, settling across the counter with her hands flat on the surface, in the manner of a woman getting directly to the point. "Finn wrote to Toronto to tell you, but the letter likely passed yours on the way. He feels terrible about it." "What's the plan?" Temperance said. "There isn't one yet. Money's the problem. Insurance didn't cover the full rebuild. Committee's short by nearly half. They're discussing whether to continue the project at all or fold the school district into the one in Larkspur, which would mean the children here have no school within 14 miles. Temperance set down her cup. She looked at the window, at the street outside, at the handful of buildings that made up Pinecroft. She thought about 14 miles. She knew exactly what 14 miles felt like now. "Is there space in the church?" she asked. Irene looked at her. "Reverend Galt hasn't been asked." "I'd like to ask him," Temperance said. "And I'd like to look at the school committee's finances before the next meeting." Irene was quiet for a moment with the expression of a woman who is rapidly upgrading her assessment of someone. "You're not going back," she said. Temperance looked at her steadily. "I came here because this was far enough. The distance hasn't changed." Reverend Galt was an agreeable man who saw no conflict between the purposes of education and faith, and said so in terms that suggested he'd thought about it before. By Thursday, Temperance had classes running in the back half of the church, 14 children ranging in age from 6 to 13, and a teaching schedule that used the morning light from the east windows she'd identified on her first walk through the building. She taught from 8 until noon. In the afternoons, she walked the settlement and introduced herself to families, and looked at what was there and what was needed with the steady, open attention she'd spent 4 years training on ledger books. And on her 4th day, she asked to see the school committee's financial records. It was Fraser who brought them to her. He was on the committee, he said, in the matter-of-fact tone he used for all facts about himself. He set a box of papers on the table in the church and said, "They're not organized." "They never are," she said. "Leave them with me." She spent 2 afternoons building order out of what she found. Supply invoices, donation records, land grant correspondence, letters from the territorial government about school funding, committee minutes kept inconsistently in 3 different handwriting styles. On the 2nd afternoon, she found the grain. A series of payments to a merchant named Aldous Fitch in Larkspur, who supplied grain and feed to the settlement cooperative at prices that were, individually, unremarkable. But Temperance had 4 years of practice in reading numbers that looked normal and weren't. She laid his invoices beside invoices from 2 other suppliers and looked at the weight records. Fitch had been recording one number on the invoice and, based on the per-unit cost, appearing to deliver a consistently lighter weight, not dramatically less. Just enough less to be invisible if you weren't looking at both sets of numbers at the same time. Which, she was fairly certain, no one had been. She put those invoices in a separate stack and kept going. When Fraser came by Friday morning to check on her progress, she turned the stack toward him without preamble. "Aldous Fitch has been giving your cooperative short weight on grain deliveries," she said. "The invoice numbers and the implied weights from the pricing don't match. It's consistent across 14 months of deliveries, which means it's not an error. Errors are inconsistent." Fraser picked up the papers. He studied them with the focused, unhurried attention he brought to things that mattered. "How much?" he said. "I'd need his actual delivery records to confirm the full figure," she said. "But based on what I can trace here, I'd estimate over $100 across the period." He was quiet for a long moment. "This cooperative was how the settlement was funding the school rebuild," he said. "Half the shortfall in the budget." She looked at him. They both understood what that meant. "You'll need a witness," she said. "Someone the settlement trusts." "Corporal Redmond at the detachment," Fraser said. "He handles commercial disputes in the territory." "Good. I can prepare a formal accounting of the discrepancies." He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to do that. It's not your dispute." "It's the reason there's no school," she said. "That makes it my dispute." Something in his face settled, the particular quality of a man who has been correct about something and is quietly noting it. The confrontation with Aldous Fitch happened on a Thursday afternoon in the detachment office, with Corporal Redmond present, and her accounting laid flat on the desk between them. Fitch was a large man who entered rooms as though he expected them to accommodate him. He sat down with the settled ease of someone accustomed to these conversations ending in his favor. Redmond read the accounting aloud in its entirety, which Temperance had recommended, and which Fitch clearly had not expected. When Redmond finished, Fitch looked at the document with an expression that went through several revisions. "Measurement error," he said. "Scales need calibration. It happens in the territory." "Consistently," Temperance said, "in the same direction, by a nearly identical margin, across 14 months of deliveries." She kept her voice at the same level she had used on train platforms and at her father's desk when someone tried to tell her a number meant something other than what it meant. "Calibration errors are random. This pattern is not random." Fitch looked at her with a quality in his expression she had seen before, the recalibration of a man who'd arrived expecting to negotiate with furniture and found something else entirely. Corporal Redmond set down the accounting. "The cooperative's accounts need an adjustment, Mr. Fitch. Miss Birch has the figure." Fitch paid it. He did not do so easily, but he did it. A bank draft delivered to the cooperative 3 days later. $112, deposited directly into the school rebuild fund. It was enough to close the gap. Outside the detachment afterward, Fraser stood in the autumn light and looked at the point where Fitch's wagon had turned the corner. "That was the school," he said. "Yes," Temperance said. He looked at her. "You did that." "The numbers did it," she said. "I just arranged them so they were legible." He was quiet in the way that meant he was holding something he hadn't said yet. "You arranged them because no one else knew to look." She looked at the road. This was true, and she knew it. The knowing of it was different from hearing him say it, sharper and warmer, and both at once. The man from Toronto arrived on a Tuesday in late September. Temperance knew before Irene finished describing him. Eastern clothes cut for city streets, the posture of a man who delivered instructions rather than received them. Questions about whether a Miss Birch was in the settlement and where she was working. "His name is Drummond," Irene said. "Clayton Drummond. Checked into the detachment guest house last night. Started asking around this morning." Drummond. She hadn't known the name, but she knew the role. Jeffrey Ashwell had money enough to hire several men. Drummond was the kind who found people who'd left arrangements others considered binding, and made the mathematics of returning more appealing than the mathematics of staying. "He'll come to the church," Temperance said, "if he's asking where I work." "What do you want to do?" Irene said. "I want to talk to him myself first," she said, "and then I want to talk to Corporal Redmond." Drummond came to the church the following morning. He was perhaps 45, precise in his movements and language, with the smooth professionalism of a man who understood that his effectiveness depended on not appearing to be what he was. "Miss Birch," he said in the doorway, "I've been looking for you." "I know," she said. "Come in." She did not offer tea. She sat across from him at the table she used for student marking and looked at him directly. "You work for Jeffrey Ashwell," she said. He didn't deny it. "Mr. Ashwell has concerns about items that left his associate's trading house when you departed Toronto." "I took ledger records I had personally maintained for 4 years," she said. "Unpaid wages, by any reasonable accounting." "Mr. Ashwell has a different accounting," Drummond said. "He's also indicated that there may be a question of a signed agreement." "I signed nothing." She said it with the same flat precision she had used describing Fitch's grain invoices. "There was a document. I read it. I did not sign it. I was 23 years old, and I understood exactly what I was being asked, and I declined." She held his gaze. "If Jeffrey Ashwell has a document with my signature on it, it is not authentic. I will say so to anyone he sends here, and to any authority he chooses to involve." Drummond recalibrated. She'd been expecting it, the particular shift in a man who arrived with one strategy and is now locating another. "You have friends here," he said. "A reputation. It would be a shame if questions were raised about your character." The church door opened. Fraser Mackay came in without hurry, the way he entered all spaces, as though he had every right to be there and no particular need to announce it. He looked at Drummond, and then at Temperance, and he read the room accurately. "Mr. Drummond," he said. He sat down at the far end of the table, not between them, just present, with the posture of a man who has put everything else down and is holding only this. "I heard you've been asking around the settlement," Fraser said. "I wanted you to know a few things about Pinecroft before you had any more conversations." He looked at Drummond steadily, without emphasis or heat. "Corporal Redmond knows every person who comes through here and every question they ask. That's the territory. There's no such thing as a private inquiry." He paused. "Miss Birch has been here 6 weeks. She opened a school. She recovered over $100 in funds stolen from this settlement. She has standing here, and she has people here. A man who comes in from outside making claims about her character will be speaking to Redmond before he finishes his first conversation." He held Drummond's gaze without wavering. "That's simply how it works." Drummond looked at both of them. He was the kind of man who read rooms professionally, and the room was telling him something clear. "This isn't finished," he said to Temperance. "I hope it is," she said, "for your sake and Mr. Ashwell's." He left. The sound of his horse on the road was one of the better sounds she'd heard in recent memory. Temperance sat with the specific physical release of sustained tension unwinding, not dramatic, just the quiet unclenching of muscles that had been braced since before she'd boarded the train in Toronto. "Thank you," she said. "You'd already handled it," Fraser said. He was looking at the empty doorway. "I just added the geography." She almost smiled. Geography mattered. He looked at her then, and she looked back, and there was in the space between them something she recognized without yet having a name for it. She was good in her life at identifying what a thing was before naming it. She was fairly confident about what this was. She wrote to her father that night. 3 drafts, the first 2 too much, the third honest without being punishing. She mailed it the next morning and kept teaching. The school rebuild was approved by the settlement committee in November. Corporal Redmond oversaw the contracts. Temperance taught through the winter from the church, and the morning light from the east windows turned out to be the best light she'd ever worked in. Drummond did not come back. Irene told her the day he left, with the casual precision of someone delivering a weather report, and Temperance allowed herself 1 week before she stopped listening for unfamiliar horses. Her father's letter arrived in late October, forwarded from Larkspur on a Thursday. She opened it in the empty church after the children had gone home, sitting at her marking table with the late afternoon light coming through the east windows at a low gold angle. Thomas Birch had written 6 pages. Her father, who communicated in sentences when paragraphs seemed excessive, had written 6 pages, and the handwriting that began careful and straight became by the 4th page the handwriting of a man who had stopped managing himself and was simply writing. He wrote, "I told Ashwell you signed nothing, because you didn't, and because I was there, and I watched you refuse, and I have no intention of pretending otherwise for his benefit or mine. I allowed a situation to develop that I should have stopped. I did not stop it because I was afraid and because I told myself it was the practical answer, and that is a failure I intend to own plainly." He wrote, "Ashwell has dropped the matter. I have retained my own counsel and made clear that I will testify to what happened in that meeting, and he is not a man who continues when the mathematics go against him." He wrote, at the very end, in writing so small it was nearly cramped, "I have been told by your brother that you opened a school. I believe this without needing to be told twice, because it is exactly the kind of thing you would do. Your mother would have found it unremarkable, in the best sense. She always expected you to be capable of more than any situation allowed. I find I have not always deserved to know you. I find I am glad I do." Temperance read the last paragraph 3 times. She sat in the empty church in the October light with 6 pages in her lap and felt the particular weight of something she'd been carrying shift. Not disappear, not resolve, but change its distribution in the way of things that have been acknowledged by the person who put them there. Her father had failed her clearly and completely. He had also now said so without euphemism or qualification. She did not know yet what to do with both of those things being true at once. She suspected it would take some time. She sat with it until the light changed, and then she folded the letter carefully and went to find Fraser. He was at the livery. He turned when he heard her come in, and he looked at her face with the accurate attention that she had stopped being startled by, and started quietly, being grateful for. "Letter from my father," she said. "Good news or bad?" "Both," she said. "He told the truth about what I did and didn't sign, about what he did and why." She paused. "He said he's glad he knows me." Fraser was quiet. "I didn't expect that to matter as much as it does," she said. "It should matter," he said. "It means you're not carrying it alone." She looked at him. In the dim livery light, she could read his face clearly, the way she'd learned to read the Alberta sky, the direction of things, what they were preparing to do. "You've been good to me since the road," she said, without making anything of it. "You didn't need anything made of it," he said. "No," she said, "I didn't. That's exactly what I mean." He understood her. She could see it. He held her gaze without retreating from it, which was his particular kind of courage, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that simply stays. He said, after a long moment, "The ranch has good land and bad records, and enough quiet to make a person realize what they're missing." He met her eyes. "I've been realizing it since August. Since the platform at Larkspur, if I'm being accurate." He paused. "I'm not asking you to give up anything you've built here. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me be part of it." Temperance looked at him for a long time, at the face she'd been reading since a Tuesday afternoon in Larkspur when he tied off his horses before he did anything else, and she'd noticed and hadn't yet known why she'd filed it away. "I came to Pinecroft with 2 trunks and $14 and a letter of appointment to a school that had burned down," she said. "I have a classroom in that church and a permanent contract and a school going up in the spring and my name in this settlement as the woman who got the cooperative's money back." She looked at him steadily. "That's mine. It was built by me. Whatever comes next, that part stays mine." "Yes," he said immediately. No qualification, no pause. "Then I'd like you to be part of it," she said. The livery was quiet around them. Fenn shifted in his stall at the far end. Outside, Pinecroft was conducting its evening in the ordinary way of small settlements. Lanterns coming on in windows, the sound of a door, someone calling a child in before the cold came down. Fraser crossed the space between them. He took her hand. Not her face, her hand in both of his, with the careful steadiness of a man who understands what he's holding. "We should tell Irene," Temperance said after a moment. "She already knows," Fraser said. "Of course she does," Temperance said. And she laughed, the real kind, the kind that arrives without deciding to. And he did too, and it was the sound of 2 people who have stopped performing anything for each other and found that what remains is more than enough. They were married in the new schoolhouse in April. The week after the building was completed, the windows were still being trimmed. The smell of fresh lumber was throughout the room. Reverend Galt performed the ceremony with the unhurried warmth of a man who had been told this was coming since November and had been quietly looking forward to it. The settlement came. All of it. Farmers and their families, mounted police constables from the detachment, Irene and her husband from the general store, the parents of 22 children who had spent the coldest months of a Northwest Territory winter learning their arithmetic in the back half of a church. Temperance Birch stood in the building she had helped bring back into existence and said the words she meant, in the clear voice she'd had since a Tuesday afternoon on a train platform, when she turned around and found herself alone and made the only sensible decision available, to sit down, make the list, and go from there. She had not been finished. She had been, as it turned out, just beginning. The school opened its doors that following Monday with the east windows full of the particular quality of Alberta morning light that Temperance had decided, somewhere in the long winter of her first year, was the best light she had ever worked in. She taught reading and arithmetic and geography, and on Friday afternoons, whatever the children were most curious about that week. She kept the school committee's finances in a ledger she'd built from scratch, balanced to the penny, the kind of record that could withstand any scrutiny from any direction, and would. Fraser kept the ranch accounts now in a system she'd built for him in November, organized, legible, honest. On evenings when she stayed late going over the numbers, they ate at the kitchen table and talked with the ease of people who had run out of things to perform for each other and found that what was left was better than what they'd been performing. On evenings when she was in the settlement, he came by the schoolhouse on the pretext of checking the wood stove, which she let him check, because it seemed to matter to him that she was warm, and it seemed to matter to her that he wanted her to be. She wrote to her father in May, a short letter, not forgiving and not withholding, simply honest, which was the register she'd always found most sustainable. He wrote back, and the letter was better than the last one, which was something, and she put it in the drawer with the others. Pinecroft grew slowly, the way honest settlements do, adding families in 2s and 3s as the railway extended, and people looked at the maps and decided that here, this particular patch of prairie with its enormous sky and its hard winters and its community of people who had collectively chosen to stay, was far enough and good enough and theirs. Temperance Birch Mackay. She used both names depending on context, and Pinecroft had stopped finding this remarkable by June. Sat at her teaching table on a Thursday morning with the spring light coming through the east windows, and thought about the woman on the platform at Larkspur Station who had turned around to find herself alone, and sat down on her mother's brown trunk and made a list of what she actually had. That list was longer now than she'd been able to imagine then. She was still adding to it, one ordinary day at a time, on solid ground she had chosen and built and refused, at every point where someone had suggested she couldn't, to leave.